let's first up talk about the two things that Trump does understand. Money and popularity.
Yes.
How's he going in the popularity stakes?
He's actually doing okay for himself, and the way he looks at it. We have some polling number. I just thought it'd be great to start and say, well, where is he? Where's his presidency today? How's the public looking at him? And is 45% approve, 52 disapprove. That's higher than in the first term, and it shows that his base is 40%. Anything above 40% are independents who kind of didn't like where the country was going under Biden, wanted to give, Trump projected as strong and good manager of the economy. The economy was booming at the end of his first term and so forth. Anyway, so he's at 45 approve, 52 disapprove. But then on issues as to where people stand on what he is doing day to day, he has two positive issues. Crime, he leads by 9 points, approval, disapproval, and border security 4. So he's strong on those issues. People believe him on these issues. They want him to deal with those issues. And so he's not underwater, but he is underwater on the jobs and the economy. He's 13 points down, inflation 26 points down, tariffs and trade, tariff wars, trade wars. People are not stupid, they know what tariffs mean, and so they think that, so he's down 15 points on that. Healthcare, people are worried about what he's going to do. He tried to repeal Obamacare in the first term, down 8 points. In foreign policy, well, the world is in chaos, he's not solving problems, and so he's down 14 points. So we're at about 160 days into his presidency. So where is he? First and foremost, we can say that America is no longer the leader of the free world. And that is a pretty profound statement. And he was able to get to that place within the first 100 days in office. Secondly, he has dismantled the global trading system that has existed for 75 years, and with ups and downs, generally brought increasing waves of prosperity and economic security around the world. So that's gone. The country is on the brink, so that's number 2. Number 3, people are worried about where the country's going economically. It could be on the brink of recession. And so with those things, it's a mixed picture. I'd like to say that President Trump is in command and out of control at the same time, because he absolutely knows what he's doing and where he's going. Just a couple of other points. He has not. In the campaign, he said, I want to address some really critical problems, but they're not being addressed. So he says, I'm going to end the war in Ukraine, of course, in 24 hours. Well, in 4,800 hours, he has not ended the war in Ukraine. The war in Gaza continues. There is no deal with Iran, and for all the activity on trade, the most he has is an interim agreement with the UK on principles, but his advisor said, well, we're going to freeze things for 90 days. We'll have 90 trade agreements at the end of 90 days. The answer is 0. And so he's not delivering the tangible results of what he's doing. So you have a world hurtling into some degree of danger. People are worried. You get up in the morning, you read about Ukraine and what's going on. And just as an aside, in the first days of the Ukraine war, first weeks, people were worried about, well, if you hit Putin too hard back, he has the nuclear option. And are you going to put him in a corner where he feels that he's got to use that? I think we're back in that territory right now, after the drone attack and everything. And he says he's going to retaliate. Trump was on the phone with him today and said that. Well, we will see where that goes. And yes, so it is I think the sense of anxiety and uncertainty is growing, and that's a real issue.
It is growing, but we're still a while off. We've got the midterm elections at the end of next year. But where are the Democrats? Has there been any introspection done since their defeat?
I've gotten several phone calls from Democrats in Washington who are following events here, and they say, we want that motion to vacate the speaker, the government. We want a motion of no confidence. If we had that, we would be really in great shape. And they don't have that. There is an infirmity in the American constitutional system. Here you have Westminster, they have a constitutional system. And that is there's no opposition leader. And there's no shadow cabinet. So it doesn't matter. So even if the opposition leader has 5 seats, whenever the prime minister says something, the dutiful, wonderful media will go to the opposition leader and say, what do you think? And at least there'll be some coverage. The real tragedy, losing the presidency last November, was a tragic event for Democrats and the country to a degree. But the real tragedy was they weren't able to take back the House of Representatives. The Senate was just given the races where they were was certainly going to go Republican, and they lost it by 5 seats, which is pretty close out of 435. And what that means is when you control the House, just like you control the House in Canberra, you have committees that have oversight of all the government, and those committees can hold hearings, issue investigations, have subpoenas, and just drive an alternative agenda as to make the government accountable to what it's doing. So that's not happening. So Democrats across the country are enraged, but they see an impotent Democratic leadership in Washington. And because there is no opposition leader. I mean, I'm angry about it. I'm angry that President Obama, frankly, has not been on the airborne saying, this man is corrupting the presidency, and President Clinton. And even Secretary Clinton. I mean, there's an abuse of power going on, and no one's really standing up in a coherent way to capture attention and do it. So you have Hakeem Jeffries, Democratic leader in the House, Chuck Schumer, Democratic leader in the Senate, and they can't even get together jointly at 10 a.m. every morning and say, since you woke up, these are the 5 atrocities that he has committed after the sun came up, and this is how we feel about them, this is what we're going to do about them, and start getting, so there's no discussion out of Washington from the Democrats, and that's why there's a whole sense of anger among Democratic voters that this is not, where are you guys? The country's going to hell, and where are you? And that's a real problem. That said, just given the nature of American politics, what happens 2 years into a presidential term when you have those midterm elections? And they're generally a referendum on the person occupying the White House. So that's when there's been the biggest swings. So I do feel, even though I thought the Democrats would hold the House last November, well, what happened was Trump got 3 more million votes in 2024 than he had in 2020. Kamala Harris got 7 million less votes than Biden and Harris had in 2020. So that's a 4 million vote deficit. It's one ballot, President, Senate, House. And so that washed through and became a lack of enthusiasm for voting for Democrats in the House. That's why they didn't win the House. But Trump's not going to be on the ballot. It's going to be a straight thing on members of Congress. And it's very easy for people to send a message in the midterm. So I do expect the Democrats to take back the House November next year, but that's 15 months away. That is a long time. And look at the damage that's been done in the first 4 months. And that's why people are really, really upset.
We talked about that at the start, where there are days you feel like you're getting whiplash because there's just so much happening.
Let's go through some whiplash today. You have seatbelts on these chairs. I'm really nervous. I've fallen out of better chairs. No. So today, Trump announces a travel ban against 12 Muslim countries and restrictions on half a dozen others. He loved the Muslim ban when he first got in office. Remember, he got in office, he declared that there was chaos at airports around the country. It was really messy. It was ugly and messy. And the anti-Muslim sentiment, grows. It's really, anyway, so he did that. And then he suspended all visas for foreign students at Harvard. So all the students there today do not have visas. They can't continue. He wants to destroy Harvard. And he won't. Harvard will survive him with $53 billion. But and he knows this plays to his base, his economic populist presence is there are elites in this country that are running this country, they're not delivering for you, and Harvard is the epitome of that. And then he announced an investigation of Joe Biden and how he governed or did not govern, and did he actually do and sign all the documents and orders that he signed. And he's asked his attorney general and another prominent lawyer to investigate Joe Biden and see what the hell was going on with him. And so that's just today. And what he's just stepping back and looking at the pattern of activity that he has, there are 2 things that are going on. It's called flooding the zone. I mean, he signed over 170 executive orders. They have unleashed several hundred policies. He does that every day. And as he goes through the day to project his agenda, he's on television 3 or 4 hours a day. He has a cabinet meeting. He brings all the cameras in. And for an hour and a half, the cameras record this live stream on Fox News as to what he's doing. He then, when the foreign leader comes, Zelensky, Prime Minister Starr, anyone, Prime Minister Albanese does not want to have a meeting in the Oval Office with And the really interesting question is, what does Prime Minister Albanese say to President Trump when they sit down? That's going to be a really interesting matter. So, so the foreign leader comes in, they say hello and everything, and then he just opens for questions for an hour, and that goes on. Then he signs executive orders in the afternoon, and he brings the press in, and they can watch. So he's flooding the zone, and it's so many issues you don't have that leader stand up at 10 in the morning and say, here are the 5 most important things, the atrocities that he committed, and you can't. It is like drinking from a fire hose. How do you do that? And then by dominating the media, he's dominating the narrative, which dominates your understanding of what's going on.
Let's talk about the fourth estate. How are they reporting all of this?
I think they're working really hard, but again, because there are just so many things. One of them would be a major story for 2 or 3 days, and now you have 5 major stories on one day, and so it just gets dispersed. It is really hard to keep up. I mean, I work maybe 3 hours a day digesting what's going on there so I can get a grip on it. But who has time to do that? And it's a wave that comes in, and then the undertow pulls you back out, and then it throws you back on the beach again. Yeah.
I'm interested because you just talked about Mr. Albanese is due to go there this year.
Yes.
How do you think the Australians are going to try and manage what they can of this?
Well, they should. I mean, if you just let's look at the trade issue, for example. I mean, what Trump says is the world has ripped us off. We have trade deficits with every country. It's terrible. I'm going to fix it. And I want to restore prosperity at home. And we'll have tariffs, and therefore we have walls, and then we can rebuild American industry. Australia is the exception to all of this. Australia, I think the people who negotiated the U.S.-Australia Free Trade Agreement deserve the Order of Lenin. I mean, they did a great job because there is a permanent structural deficit in trade that Australia has with the United States. It never moves into circle. They did a great job. Anyway, it was good. And so what Albanese should really say to Trump is, look, I understand what you want to punish on the global trading system, but you're punishing everyone, including us, and we don't deserve it. And what you have to say on how we do steel and aluminium, you have wrong facts, and that's being mishandled. But instead of punishing everyone, why don't you just say, you want to get out of this vise that I'm putting you in? Well, look at Australia. Have a positive example. And the more you're like Australia, the less I will punish you. And see if that works. So I expect a call. Get on the plane. Come with me.
It's been really interesting because again we've heard Don Farrell in the past week say the tariffs that are being applied to Australian companies, this is not the act of a friend.
No.
They keep repeating that line, but it's not having any cut through.
Well, you have 2 models as to how to deal with this. You have the Starmer model out of the UK, where he gets there, and they talk in sort of jovial, and I mean, it's terrific. We have a king too, but so pull out an invitation and say, hey, we want you to come and have a state visit, and Trump, loves it. So it's a Starmer model of friendly disagreement, let's just work it through, and that did lead to at least an in-principle interim agreement between the two, and they're kind of working that out. But the tariffs remain, and they're still paying them. Then you have the Carney model in Canada, and he was really angry. I mean, Trudeau and his party were going completely down the drain, and the Conservatives were going to romp, and then Trump comes in and starts these trade wars with Canada and Mexico because the agreements between the countries that Trump, initiated and sealed are not good enough for Trump, and so he's going to renegotiate them and punish Canada terribly. So the Canadian people get angry. It's different than Australia because you have a 3,000-mile common border. We're farther away. It's just less intense. The sentiments, I think, are the same, and I think the sentiments wash through the political system here, and we're a factor to a degree in the outcome of the election here. But there was a true changing factor for Canada, and he's pugnacious, and he just says, the alliance will never be the same. This is not what it was, and we're angry about it. And I think, today, the Premier of Ontario, steel, okay? The tariffs just went up 50% to 50%. That is just pure protectionism. That's not a trading thing. That is just like an immediate wall to increase steel production in the U.S. and protect those jobs. But that means the prices of steel, they're going to go up, and so it's going to be terrible. So the Ontario Premier said to Carney, you got to hit them harder on this. That's where sentiment is.
Well, Carney's not afraid of doing that. I mean,
No, he's
was
not
saying
afraid of
elbows
doing
up,
it.
elbows up, which is
Yeah, that's almost a curse word.
Yeah.
Canada, yeah, but that's what the Canadian people want, and it's the right thing. This sort of tyranny over global trade, global economics, it's a one-way street with Trump, and people don't like being at the end of that street.
And things could get particularly tricky with China.
Yes.
He might want to cut a deal with China that leaves Taiwan completely exposed.
It's quite possible, and so there are two dimensions to it, but before we get there, when Trump came in, first it was going to be Ukraine, then it was going to be Gaza, and so they were number one, number two to deal with. They've not been dealt with satisfactorily, but it took up a lot of space. And now finally he's moved into China, and it's an undefined territory. We don't know what's going to happen. He's very frustrated that he can't get President Xi on the phone. I mean, that's really, really interesting. Do you think he should get him on the phone? What do you think?
No.
So, and he can't kind of understand that, and I think he needs to understand that China can absorb a lot more pain than the United States can absorb in terms of how it's expressed politically at home. And President Xi is a grandmaster of that, those dynamics. So we don't know, what does Trump want? Trump wants to complete what he did in the first term, which would be to have one of the greatest trade deals ever executed with China to the benefit of the United States and so forth. And if he can do that, that would be a big deal. But what does Xi want? I think he wants Taiwan, and I think he wants dominance to a degree in the Indo-Pacific. And so what does that mean? Is that tradable? So if they say, okay, yeah, we can have a much more favorable trade deal for you, but that means you're not going to invade, you're not going to defend Taiwan when we take it over, and we're going to have a larger presence in the Indo-Pacific, and we don't want any troubles out of it. In other words, you have the Americas, Europe's divided, but in Asia so we'll see what road it goes. We don't know. But the really interesting thing for Australia is all these things are unfolding with respect to China, but we have an alliance with the United States, but nothing has changed in that alliance. Nothing has changed as to how that is working yet. At some point, what that alliance looks like, what it means for Australia's investments in defense and foreign policy, and so, well, foreign policy is different, in defense and the posture of both countries, that needs to be, it should be adjusted if these circumstances change.
Well, Dennis Richardson,
Who's terrific.
And former ASIO boss, former head of DFAT, used to say, 2 friends, 1 ally.
Yeah.
Are we still in that situation where it's 2 friends, 1 ally?
I don't know. I hope so, but I don't know.
We are yet to see the AUKUS deal play out. Australia has paid the first down payment to the United States to help speed up the shipbuilding process.
Yes.
We've also heard in recent times the UK speak about the need to increase the process of building their own submarines, no talk of Australia. How do you think this is going to play out for Australia?
I don't know. Even those who are critical of AUKUS believe, many of them believe that Australia does need the existing, I'm not an expert on this stuff, but what I hear is that the existing submarines are insufficient. Australia should have some defense capability, and the answer is better submarines. So that should be a goal to get to, but it's the context of that goal, 2 friends, 1 ally. I thought it was very interesting in the trade pressures, Trump, America-China trade pressures. There was pressure from Trump for Australia to stand more with Trump against China, and this government resisted that, and that's the right posture, in my opinion. Yes. So I don't know where this ends.
No, it will be fascinating to see where it ends.
Yeah.
And this is
I mean, I think she wants to put America through some pain, the same pain that they put China through. Now, we came out of that pain, and we don't want to go back to those days. So I think it's very important, well, two things. It's very important for Australia to maintain, to build on the existing relationship so that it works and we're comfortable with it. And at the same time, Australia needs to protect, no matter what happens with the United States. I mean, Trump wants to pull U.S. troops out of South Korea. Goodness knows what he wants to do in Japan, and so forth. And Trump doesn't like multilateral organizations and regional alliances and all that stuff. So Australia has an outlook on the Indo-Pacific as to what it wants. It wants friendly relations and more democracy, more goodwill between a dozen, all the countries in the region. That should continue. Now, that started with Albanese and Penny Wong, and they really invested a lot in rebuilding Australia's relationship with countries across the region. That should be doubled down again, because that's in Australia's interest no matter where this thing goes.
They are, you say that they should be doubling down. I think they'll have no problem trying to do that.
Right.
Also, given the numbers that they will enjoy in Parliament, people will have
And
time
it's
to...
sound policy. It makes sense to everybody. We should be friends with as many countries as possible. And in a world that has, where Trump is projecting tariffs, we should project as many free trade zones as possible. That's why Don Farrell, very close to closing a deal with the European Union. That would be a very good thing for this country. So the more free trade agreements that you can reach, the less important, the less potent are Trump's protectionist policies as far as Australia is concerned. So keep building free trade zones. And I think Farrell's an excellent minister, and I really hope he delivers on that.
We just touched on it earlier about the Democrats being in a mess. Can you see, is there anyone, even from the previous administration, who is willing to step up and to start corralling people? And
Well, no, again, because the structure is just doesn't seem to work in that direction. But there, no, I think this anger is going with the Democratic Party is just going to persist at the grassroots level. But those people are not; they will vote, and so again, the reckoning time will be many months away.
let's talk about some of the gems that we have in Australia that protect us against a Trump. The Australian Electoral Commission?
Yes. Well, one thing in these discussions that I'm able to have with many people on these issues is what we have here in the morning. Sabra will report on AM on almost every morning. Well, she reports every morning, and what you hear the first thing is generally a story out of the United States given time zones. And then terrible things happen, and then it leaches into we're an echo chamber. And then opportunistic politicians pick up a line, and so they start running with it, and suddenly you have Trumpist things coming through at some level in the Australian political culture. So when things do happen over there, and there's an echo chamber here, then a lot of Australians really worry, is this a threat to our country, or are we at risk of having the American experience visiting the Australian experience? And the answer is no. We're not going to have that. I really hope in talking with you that people leave here with a sense of great, not just pride, but confidence that Australia's democracy is one of the strongest in the world, and it is, and it's going to endure. So, yes, we have an Australian Electoral Commission. I mean, look at, several things. It's uniform rules around the country. A person who registers to vote in Balmain, New South Wales, where we live, to the farthest reaches of the Northern Territory, you go through the same process to get on the rolls. And then you have the electorates established. It's done on a nonpartisan basis, numbers, population shifts, and so forth. It's not politicized by each state, and the state legislatures do not draw those lines. And then you have elections, and you have a counting of the votes. And look at the vote in Bradfield. Was it 37 seats?
26 votes.
26 votes. And I don't know if it's going to go to court, but if it does go to court, it'd be an orderly process. There's no charge of a rigged election being bandied about, which would be the immediate reaction in the United States. You also, we have a Westminster system. And that means that Pauline Hanson will never be Prime Minister, Tweety Forrest will never be Prime Minister, Glenn Palmer will never be Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is always going to be the leader of the majority party in the House of Representatives. And so that means that you're a member of the House of Representatives, you've been living with the norms and so forth for some years before you become leader of the party and then Prime Minister. Or even if you come in from the outside like Bob Hawke, you're ingrained in the system. And so you're with it. And so, when Scott Morrison arrogated 4 or more cabinet positions to himself, that was just a shocking development. And he was censured by Parliament, the first Prime Minister to be censured for violating those norms. Trump has been impeached twice and he's been reelected. I mean, so that works. You don't have
compulsory voting is also
compulsory voting is the third pillar, and preference is extremely important in the compulsory voting, and that works. That means ultimately each winner in each seat has 50+% of the vote, and that's a clear mandate. You also have institutions like the courts and the High Court. And there are conventions that attorneys general in both parties, when they come into government, follow. As far as the appointment of a Supreme Court justice, and that means that the Supreme Court justice nominee does not go before a Senate committee where he or she is asked, well, how do you stand on abortion? And the head of the Reserve Bank of Australia is appointed through similar conventions, and they don't go before a Senate committee and are grilled on what are you going to do on interest rates. So you have a system that delivers each and every time, and you get a democracy sausage after you vote. It works, and I mean, everyone is kind of, well, you may have another election tomorrow, but and people are kind of tired, and they're tired of the politicians, and it's messy and everything like that. But the system delivers, and it works, and it's something that I want you all to have tremendous pride, and it's not going to be taken away. This country will come through Trump better than almost any other country. Because, well, as I said in Fiddler on the Roof, may God bless and trust the Tsar. May God bless and keep the Tsar far away from us.
I always like to be constructive about these things as well.
Me too.
Do you have hope? What hope do you have about the situation in the United States?
I like to have hope, but I'm really worried. I mean, what Trump is doing is of an unprecedented nature. It's sweeping. It is what he's done to the bureaucracy. No one has had power like Elon Musk has had power.
But the bromance is over.
The bromance is over, but the damage has been done, and he will continue doing damage in less dramatic ways. That a private citizen can be deputized by the president to go into government agencies and say, you're fired, you're fired, you're fired, and put reductions in force across the departments, and then say, and you're going to expunge, you're going to cancel these grants, cancel these contracts, expunge from your public records anything that has to do with how women are doing in the service and how people of color are doing in the service, and all of that. So it's huge. It will take years to repair. And there are stories every day. The head of the National Endowment of the Smithsonian Institution. If you've been to Washington, you've been on the Mall, you've seen the wonderful museums in the Smithsonian Institution. She's been fired, but she's not going anywhere yet. Now, so the check, no House of Representatives, no Senate, the presidents, they're the courts. And so you do have, again, over 100, close to 200 court rulings against him on what he's doing, from how he's conducting the deportations to how he's doing conducting the firing of government agency heads and so forth. They're bubbling up, and ultimately we'll get to the Supreme Court. So there will be a couple of landmark cases on tariffs, on immigrations, on government agencies and universities. But that takes time. But the other thing is, you can see from the scale of what's being done and the how strongly he prosecutes these agencies and executes things. This is a destruction exercise, and to rebuild it will take a long period of time. And the reasons he gives for doing these things, they're part of the political discourse. They sit with people. A lot of people like what he's doing. They really did. The approval ratings is, he's in the 40s. So they're not going to change their opinion. When the reformers come in, they're going to say, oh God, you're going to undo Trump stuff that we like. So it's hard, it's messy, it's going to be tough.
Mm.
So yeah, I'm worried.
What about, we've had also the United States withdraw from a number of things. The Paris Climate Accords, again, it's taken away a lot of funding for the World Health Organization and other things.
Foreign aid programs.
Foreign aid programs.
Yes.
How do you think that's going to play out?
Well, I think around the world it plays out terribly. And I think people, and again, the world's adjusting to, or trying to adjust to, that America's not the leader of the free world anymore. I mean, on the front lines, Europe faces that issue as far as Ukraine is concerned. Are they really, how much can they replace what the United States is now not going to do? And can they afford it? Will be as effective? And so it's the world becomes less. It's just harder to see clearly where the world is going, and that is really causing people grave doubts.
We also talked about, we touched on this a little bit earlier, you said that the Fourth Estate is doing a pretty good job. It is, you know, if you get 3 or 4 stories a day, you're hard pressed to do proper analysis on those stories if you're getting sort of wave after wave after wave.
Yes.
But also organisations like NPR are being defunded. Are citizens coming to the fore and helping with the funding here to help?
This is going to be a test, and I worked on this issue when Ronald Reagan was president. He looks kind of good to me by now. I kind of miss him, you know? Nancy, she was great. So when Reagan was president, he wanted to end the funding for public broadcasting. And I was working on that. I was on the staff of the committee that dealt with that. And we won. He came in with big budget cuts for NPR and PBS. And we had to, it was his first time as, well, we've had Reaganism and Trumpism. So when the Reagan Revolution gelled in that first year of his term, he wanted to show, he would cut taxes, cut regulations, cut budgets. And that was the program. Democrats controlled the House, that made a big difference. And the House leadership said, Reagan was just like the president, a landslide, we got to deal with him, so we're going to have to work this through. So public broadcasting took a hit, but the Democrats voted to keep critical mass of funding to keep public broadcasting going. The Senate was Republican, and so that was, you know, going to be tough. Would they do the same? So something very interesting happened, and I'm looking for, Trump has proposed to zero out all money that the government gives to public broadcasting, and a vote may occur in the House as soon as next week on that. And so it gets to the Senate, and public broadcasting was saved by conservative Republican senators from rural states. Barry Goldwater. Does anyone remember Barry Goldwater? Okay.
Yes.
You're younger than I am. No. So Barry Goldwater, and then Ted Stevens of Alaska, and the ABC here has similar reach in country areas, and a lot of national members here like the ABC because it's the main source of news information, and it's essential to life. So that's what happened, and the Republicans came to the party, and we saved public broadcasting. So this fight is going to play out in the same dimensions next week. But Trump is very serious. I mean, and he's not. He doesn't hide it. I mean, he says, "I'm going after them because these are radical left monsters." That's what he says, and they have no.
Horrible.
It's horrible, and we have no. And we have never seen anything like this before, and you. So it's in ideological terms, and the principle that he stands on is media should all be in the private sector. That's where it belongs. But the ugly truth is he wants to censor them.
During the first Trump presidency, there were a number of people in the administration who acted as handbrakes. Where are they now?
There are no handbrakes on this guy. He learned in his first term that he learned a lot from his first. Trump is not stupid. He's an extremely canny, cunning, and conniving person, and he has street smarts, and he knows what he's doing, and he's been in the presidency for 4 years, and he knows how to get things done because he knows what stopped him from getting things done in the first term. And what stopped him most was the guardrails in terms of some staff, Republicans who didn't like Trump, but they want to be patriots, and so yes, I will go into service of the president in order to make sure we keep our democracy and things are okay. So he had a chief of staff who would say to him, you can't do this, Mr. President. No, we can't execute this. He had an attorney general who after the election in 2020 said, you've lost in court, you lost the election, we're not taking it any further. He had a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff who said, I am not sending troops into the streets of American cities who are protesting because of the murder of George Floyd and other stuff. There's no one in the office right now, there's no one in his administration who will stand up and say, I'm sorry, Mr. President, you can't do this. So let's say tariffs, the courts, the only check on this system. Last week, a ruling in the International Trade Court, it'll go to the Appeals Court, ultimately the Supreme Court. Can Trump impose those tariffs that he imposed across the world? And the court said, no, you can't. There's no basis in the law that you relied on to impose the tariffs to enable you to do so. So we're striking them down. That will ultimately get to the Supreme Court. I'm not a lawyer, but I did read the opinion and so forth. It looked pretty good to me. So it'll get ultimately to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says, this ruling is affirmed, thou shalt not. What does Trump do? And for the first time in American history, you may have a president who says, oh yes, I can. And then you are in new territory. And because no president has ever disobeyed an order of the Supreme Court. And then, so normally when you disobey a court order, you're held in contempt. Oh, so who do I go to enforce a contempt citation? My Attorney General. She's not going to do anything to bring the president into contempt. And so this is, when people say, and it goes to the earlier question about democracy, this comes down to the essence of how the democratic system is supposed to work. And so we will just see how this plays out. But that could be a moment where the fate of American democracy is really decided. So we'll see. I always like to leave things on an upbeat note. Now about your democracy. It's fantastic. Can we go to foreign policy just for a second? Let's go to foreign policy. There's some trends in the foreign policy that I think are really important. There's a columnist named Gerard Baker who writes for the Wall Street Journal. He's really good, really smart, really tough, and everything he says. So, what is the role of America in the world? And we're not the leader of the free world anymore. I'm sorry, I vote over there too. I vote as many times as I can over there. So Gerard Baker of the Wall Street Journal, he says, Trump has set, quote, Trump has set aside values, ideals, alliances, and partnerships in favor of U.S. economic, commercial, and national security goals. In other words, the country doesn't stand for anything anymore except what's good for the United States. And that's the basis on which he's prosecuting his foreign policy. I mean, Trump praises America's adversaries, Iran. Can't wait to do a deal with Iran. Putin, he gets on the phone with Putin, but he still blames Zelensky for the war in Ukraine. And then he wants to take over Canada and wants to invade Greenland. And those are NATO countries to which the United States is part. So the acts of superpowers now supplants, national multilateral institutions, and he's withdrawing from multilateral institutions. So pragmatism replaces senses of right and wrong. And so this is kind of the new world that we're in, and it's really difficult. Might makes right, and he's doing that as often as he can. It's
sort of slide into authoritarian mercantilism of sorts, would you say?
He acts in an authoritarian way. Yeah. He's had fewer bills passed Congress than any modern president up in this, with the number of days he's been in office. And he rules by executive order. He loves that. And everything goes through him. It's amazing that he can spend time on who is going to run the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. And he fires the board. All things come, look how the Oval Office is configured and how people are always, he's sitting there, standing around him and so forth, and he loves the exercise of the authority. And nothing is too small.
How then can you explain his popularity given all of this that's happening?
So far, I mean, the point is, when does the pain kick in? Ultimately, it's the economy. I don't think he was elected on cultural values. I mean, that was his base beliefs in it. He courted his voters for years. He knew how to do that. They're enthusiastic about it. If you look at video of, I'm really a masochist here, but if you go to C-SPAN and watch Trump rallies, if you just look closely at the crowd, it's like going to a Taylor Swift concert. They love them. They know the lyrics. They know the jokes. They know the routine. They know the dance. They know all this stuff, and so they're not rusted on. They're welded on, and that's 40% of the country. So they voted for him for all the reasons of elitism and protecting the country and make America great again and nationalism. We're going to deal with the immigrants and so forth. And they want him to. They voted for him to do that, and they want him to do it, and he's doing it. So that's secure. But if in fact the protectionism leads to a softening of the economy, and people can't. People are worse off next year than they were at the election, then it will come back. I thought the headwinds on inflation really, I thought Kamala Harris lost principally because the headwinds on inflation were, that's why there were 7 million fewer voters for her. I thought it was actually going to hurt Albanese and Labor in this government, but I listened to Eric, the leader of the Democratic staff, the Labor Party staff.
Oh, yeah. Erickson, Paul Erickson.
Paul Erickson.
Sorry, at the press club.
At the press club, and he said the vote, first it was an interest rate cut, but then voters began to appreciate contrasting Labor and Dunn as to what was put in place by the government to cushion the blow of inflation, and it was tangible, and it was ongoing, and it was real, and it paid off. There were rate cuts in the United States, but the same kind of programs were not in place, and so Harris and Biden, if he had stayed in the race, I think they would have been hit very hard by a bad economy that was in trouble and that was hurting households.
I just want you to take a note that we've been talking about United States politics. How did you take the result in Australia, particularly the policies that seem to, initially the coalition was quite forward with, but quickly realising public reaction? I'm thinking of the work, forcing public servants to work from home, for example.
Yes.
We had some talking about they were wanting, not so much this time, but the women in sport issue. There was just some echoes of the US politics that people, some on the Conservative side, were really trying to hammer home.
Yeah, I mean, abortion suddenly arose in Queensland, before that state election and everything. That's the echo chamber, and we get that. And I think, but I think, I think Australians get it, and they know what's truly important and then what's noise. And I think they want to tune out the noise. And the center, the whole system drives voting results to the center, and that's where things are truly decided. And this center looked pretty good under the current government.
As an American Australian, we followed this very closely. My question is how do you feel about the American media? Because now the Washington Post isn't as left as they used to be, and the Trump supporters don't read the Wall Street Journal. They all watch Fox News.
Right.
I mean, we know this from family. We have a brother in Texas who's a very strong Trump supporter, and we've had conversations, but luckily we're dual citizens and could vote, and I did bring him up and tell him I canceled his vote. But
He loves his sister.
I just wonder how you feel about the media over there, because there isn't really much media that gets through to the Trump supporters, except for Fox News, and so much of Fox News is so fake.
I think all that you say is true. I think people are getting the news from a lot of, people are not just looking for reinforcing sources of news, and there's plenty on the conservative side to fill that, from podcasts to other streaming services to Fox, and networks and even more to the right than Fox. So it's there. As far as the Post and the New York Times is concerned, I mean, I do think they really do cover the news, and I think there's very thoughtful analysis. I think and public TV and radio are the same. But you're in your silo, and so it's not. I don't watch Fox News very much. I imagine you don't watch Fox News very much either. So we're kind of stuck in this shouting match between us.
And also, there's so much in the news about him supposedly having dementia.
Oh, you mean Joe
Do you feel
Biden?
Trump has,
Trump.
having dementia? If you watch, we watch a lot of the YouTube, to the left, the MSNBC, and there's quite a few psychiatrists that have podcasts who spend their time analyzing his, and they all say he has dementia. You can tell from his body language, you can tell from the way he walks, you can tell from his sentences. You look at his speeches 15 years ago and compare them to now. And what happens if he truly does have dementia? How far, if that progresses, he's going to get crazier than he is already.
Well, in the Constitution, there's a process if the president can't discharge duties that the cabinet can so decide, and you have an acting president.
But with the
J.D. Vance.
I rest my case.
Could you share some reflections on the human rights issues at stake? Because it's not all about the economy, is it? And how the human rights issues are playing out and what difference you think that might make for American voters?
I think a lot. I mean, Trump really, he's very strong on the police and the enforcement and so forth. And I think people of color and people in vulnerable communities are feeling unsafe about what the government can do to them. And I don't see any, that's going to increase in intensity over the next, for quite a while. So what does it require? It requires leadership at the local level. So you need a strong sheriff who's going to stand up and just say, well, we're going to follow the law here. You have governors of states, and they can do many things. 20 Democratic states, all the attorneys general of those states have joined together to file a lot of lawsuits across the board on the policies. So this is really, the protections are going to come from the bottom up, not the top down. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Chris. Two aspects. One is corruption is okay from the White House point of view.
I'm all for corruption.
If it's in the open.
Yes.
And they've disbanded all the corruption agencies, etc. So I'd like to comment. The second one is the role of violence or threatened violence against judges delivering pizzas, against GOP members that tend to step out of line, and the death threats again.
On the threats to judges and other officials, fortunately there's a lot of barking but not biting, and so terrible things have not happened, and that's a very good thing, and no one should attack judges. As far as, I'm sorry, the first...
The GOP members as well. And
yeah.
Before that was corruption.
The corruption, by any measure, the corruption is at a level that we've never seen before. I mean, that he travels in the Gulf, to the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, and the Emirates, and Qatar, and the family advances those trips, and business deals are signed, and then Trump comes in at the government level. He had events by people investing in one of his crypto companies, and the top 200 investors in his crypto companies, many of whom are foreign nationals and so forth. The top 200 went to a dinner with him, and he took the top 20 of those 200, and they got a tour of the White House. And so it's he's pardoning a lot of people, and a woman contributed $1 million to his campaign, went to dinner at Mar-a-Lago earlier this year, and her son was pardoned last week. And so people, at some point, it should bite, but it isn't yet.
The thing I'm interested in is the White House view is because it's all out in the open, it's not corruption.
Right. If I shoot you in plain daylight, what do you think is going to happen to me? Yeah.
Where are the protests? If the only way to overcome an autocratic government in the absence of other politicians or other executive, any of those protections, where are all the protests? There were a lot more with Trump. One, there were pink hats and lots of, but are people too scared, or are they waiting for his policies to bite them? Are they just biting us at the moment and not biting?
Initially, after the election, people were just so stunned and they just said, oh, we can't, let it rip, and he'll destroy himself, and they did nothing. Then in the first few months, as the policy set in, there was a lot of anger about it, and you did see demonstrations in cities across the country on weekends. We're going to go back July and August, and we'll see whether that movement is rising. Ultimately, you will need protests in cities across the country on a scale similar to Tel Aviv on a Saturday night for it to register that something is profoundly wrong with the country. And so it's up to everyone to figure that out. I hope they do.
Well, first, an observation. Trump didn't win the election, the Democrats lost one.
That's fair enough.
And they haven't paid for that. But there seem to be two threads running through. We keep talking about Trump does this, Trump does that, Trump does the other. There are two threads running through what he's doing, or someone's doing. One is personal petty vindictiveness, and that's easy to recognise. But the other is a very malign and sophisticated political campaign to undermine the democratic systems. He is not bright enough to set that up. Who's driving the bus?
I think he's been pushing buttons for decades, and I think he knows what buttons to push, and I think they are. But he's not a figurehead. He really he's laid out, what he believes in, and there are pillars of I'm going to close the borders, I'm going to have tariffs, I'm going to make America great again, and we're going to withdraw from the world. And then he hires people, his cabinet, all his officials who believe in that, and they're as zealous as he is, and they deliver on it. It's like having chips in your brain, and then you act on the impulses that you're getting. And I think it is very very effective. But it's not nice, but it is absolutely happening.
One here and then there.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4. I'd like to know how you feel about the Supreme Court, and if
I love the Supreme Court.
you love the Supreme Court. But do you feel that they will ultimately stand up and defend the law?
It's going to be, it'll be a test. I mean, there are two clearly ultra-conservative judges, Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito. Then there are some in the center right, and then there's center left. I think this tariff case, when it finally gets to him as to whether he could impose those tariffs based on that law that does not sustain those tariffs, I think that will be the real test. Now, John Roberts is the Chief Justice, is an institutionalist, and so the court has to land correctly for the institution to be protected. It does not have an army that protects the court. It's just its deliberations, its orders, and its reasoning. So that is going to be a test of that. But last year the question was, Trump was indicted dozens of times, was facing trials everywhere, and his lawyers came up with prosecuted the notion that a president should be immune from prosecution, and the court accepted it. Mm-hmm. And it's just astonishing that he can commit crimes in broad daylight, and he could probably be any mayor doing what he's doing would be indicted for corruption, right? And so he can commit his acts in broad daylight, but he can't be indicted, he can't be prosecuted. Because they say anything that's an official act he can't be prosecuted for. Well, he's a president, he's acting every day in an official capacity.
The Defence Secretary recently demanded that we almost double our expenditure on defence. Australia can't possibly do that and won't do it. What do you think the repercussions
We're going to find out in the meeting that Albanese has with Trump. That will absolutely be discussed, and I think the Prime Minister's position is, well, don't give me a figure. Let's figure out what is the money going to be used for, and then if we absolutely need it, we should do it. I think that's the rational thing than just setting it's not arbitrary, but some percentage of your GDP in order to do things. And again, we're making those decisions based on what our outlook is, and our outlook is determined by where the U.S. stands and where China stands, and that's not clear. So we're just kind of drifting along under the current structure that applied before the Trump presidency. And I think there needs to be a national conversation about those issues. Where are we going? Why are we? And then how do we get there? And figure it out together. Yeah.
Got time for 2 more, sorry. Jean, and then another one over here somewhere.
I'm interested in which states, or whether there are any states which are likely to mount a real anti-Trump feeling in America? And the other thing is, which age groups are right behind him
Who are behind
in
Trump?
America? Which age groups? Or is it across the board?
I think it's across the board. I think the surprise is that among Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, among younger voters, and particularly young men, there's been a drift away from the Democratic Party. If you think about it for a moment, from 2020, so someone born in 2020 is 25 years old today. So maybe they came of age around and started paying attention to things when they were 16. That was 2016. You look at the past 9 years, who've been the two presidents that you've been paying attention to? Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And this is so people are looking at Trump, sometimes he's their first president in, growing up life. Oh, that's what a president should do. That's the way a president talks. He's normalized for their mind. That's normal. That's a problem.
It's scary.
It is scary.
Okay, we've got one question here and then one at the back.
My question is about why do you think that some of the Democratic leaders or ex-presidents haven't maybe come out a little bit more and sort out maybe some of the governors or ex-governors as well?
I agree. It does make me angry. But why? I think no. I think they're afraid of just being attacked. That it'll look to the world as if they're just doing it for political purposes, and their message will be colored by that or discredited to a degree by that. I just think that's a misjudgment. The presidency as an office and what the Constitution says and how the government should function should be above that. And I don't think, particularly for someone like Obama, to get there, he's always been above that. And that's why it's so disappointing that we don't see him doing it. So I probably just ended my relationship with Barack Obama. But the country's more important. I agree with you. Yeah. Hi. Okay.
So as an American, I've always kind of had faith in the checks and balances system. And,
right now there are no checks and balances.
Right, and that's the concern. But I was wondering if you could elaborate on maybe the Australian, view towards that, and if we should be worried that maybe there'll be a grassroots movement towards this kind of authoritarian, governance.
I don't see any prospects for a grassroots movement to authoritarianism here. And I do think that people see what's happening. You're all here tonight. Why? Because you're concerned about what's going on over there. And then I just see that everywhere that I go. And I think that just shows a genuine angst about the future, because we are smaller, very far away. They're over there, they're powerful. And so people begin to think, will America still have a democracy in a few years' time? And what does that mean for us? And it's a real problem. So I think people are trying to grapple with this in good faith to understand it and help chart a better course for the future, at least for here. And I think the country's doing that very well.
I've just noticed two very keen questions. If everyone's okay, we've got a couple of minutes over time. Bruce, you're doing it. Did a stellar job of this question answering.
One here, and then last one over there. I'm an optimist at heart, and I'm trying to look for some opportunity for something that might be positive in the future. After, I guess, eventually this term will come to an end, huge damage, and well, let's hope it does come to an end. But is there some hope that Americans might learn that the American system actually is a bit broken? It's majorly broken. It actually needs some reform. Is there any potential, do you think, for reform of the American political system?
Well, that's what the country learned that in Watergate.
Yeah.
And a couple things along these lines. It learned it in Watergate, and who was the perfect antidote to Richard Nixon? Jimmy Carter, a very religious Southern governor, clean liver and all that, and who said, "I'll always tell you the truth." And he was elected. Then Ronald Reagan comes in. But how long does it take to? And Reagan got elected because if you go back to 1980, the Iran hostages were seized. We had oil embargoes. We had high inflation, high interest rates. It was very hard for Carter to win that election. so Reagan comes in, and he establishes Reagan. He was a very compelling, charismatic force, very effective. It took 12 years from 1980 to 1992 for the Democrats to regroup, find two leading moderates, Clinton and Gore, who could command the center of the nation and win. It may take 12 years, and now I hope it's dated from 2016, but it could be dated from 2020 for things to, there will be a swing back, but it's not going to be fast, and we're going to have to live with that.
But what about actual reform of the actual system?
There were reforms that came in after Watergate,
Okay.
but money. There were campaign contribution limits in the United States, and then the Supreme Court says, well, spending money on a campaign is sort of like your speech in a campaign, and you have unlimited speech. You have free speech. So the finance limits were dismantled. They were barred, prohibited. So Elon Musk can spend $230 million US to get Trump elected in Wisconsin, a state Supreme Court, evenly balanced in this one state on abortion, and there's a vacancy. So whoever wins the vacant seat will help control the outcome of abortion in Wisconsin. $90 million was spent on that one election. Now the Democrat won. Musk contributed $20 million to that candidate. His decline stemmed from that night. It was two months ago, where his candidate lost, and he had gone there. He'd had a rally. He had his chainsaws, all everything, and because he lost, his standing went down. That was his apogee, and he went into decline, leading to where we are today with Musk. So this is going to be hard work. One other thing, I did think when the court said unlimited money, I thought that would benefit the conservatives because big business, big money, and so forth. What we found is the money on the left is as potent, as strong as the money on the right. It's astonishing how much money there is in American politics.
Lucky last question.
Okay.
It's really not a question, but it's a statement. I felt that Bernie Sanders has really tried to make a bit of an effort in the last 162 days or 42 days or whatever it is, particularly the first 100. He was really trying to garner support and realisation as to what Trump was trying to affect all of the world. So in response to that lady, even though we're trying to identify a Democratic leader, Bernie is an independent, but he has tried.
Yes, and I think but Democrats are where Bernie is, generally speaking. And he's done on these tours around the country. It's been him and AOC together. What a couple, fantastic. And they're very effective. So,
and my only other statement is, it just seems, I'm very familiar with the Westminster system and it's playing out well. But I feel as if the United States system is quite complex because of the 50 states, and it's quite moribund. It's become quite moribund in complexity, and it takes so long to get things sorted. And I don't know how the United States are going to fix that.
No, that's right. I mean, what we're all dealing with in this discussion is we thought the United States was a great democracy. It's no longer a great democracy. How do we make it better? And that gets to your question, and that's kind of where we are. A disappointment in expectations and outlook. And here we are. Sabra?
Bruce will be really interested in your insights when you travel to the United States. You can tell us, I'm sure that we'll be reading about what is happening on the ground.
I'm going to play my annual Ronald Reagan game of golf.
Thank you so much for your insights tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.